So in middle school, I fell in love for the first time with the bell curve. There was something really comforting about taking my incredibly chaotic life and just having this perfect graphic representation of it. And there is no better example of a perfect bell curve than the middle school chorus. So on the one end, on the high end, you have kids that can really sing and love to sing. And on the low end, you have kids that can't really sing and love to sing. But the majority of that chorus lies right in the middle of that perfect curve, which are the kids that can kind of sing but don't really bother to learn the words. Now, in my defense, as being part of this middle section, let me just say in 1972, there were very few options for girls. There was home ec, and following the souffle explosion investigation, I was asked not to return to that class. And there was typing, and you know, the whole like keyboarding thing seemed like a fad. I just didn't really feel like it was gonna take hold. So there I am, middle school chorus, and pretty early in, I'm like, this sucks. I gotta come up with some kind of strategy. I'm not gonna learn the words. And so I invent what is now widely known as the reverbial delay method. And this goes, I would pair myself up with a kid on the high end of that curve, and I would just wait for them to sing their note, and then I would jump in right behind them. Oh, say, can you, see. Bye, the, don, turler, li, la, lies. And most of the kids were totally fine with this. The kids in the middle of the curve were like, oh my God, will you hook us up with somebody on the high end? The kids on the high end are like, we've never been so popular. The kids on the low end are like, we can't even hear what we're singing, so we don't really care. There was this one girl, Lisa Klempner, who called me out at the end of chorus, and she said to the chorus director, she's cheating. And even Mr. Stentz, who was paid by the New York City Board of Education for me to learn the words, just kind of looked at her and went, it's middle school chorus. So this method worked perfectly for 2 full seasons until the winter concert when O Tannenbaum was on the program. Now, the performance was great. But when we were done, we got back to my grandmother's house, and she was so moved by seeing what she thought was me singing in her native language that she said, oh, please, Susan, sing that again. My brother, who was at the table, who, like most older siblings, just had made a career out of waiting for opportunities to take me down and knew about the reverbial delay method, said, yes, please do, sing that again. I think we'd all like to hear it. And so I was stuck. So I started out really strong. O Tannenbaum, that went really well. And then I just thought, I'll just sort of fade off. Hab kein Lederhosen. My father, who was also there, and spent most of my childhood with that kind of look on his face, like, I don't really understand what's happening, decided this was the moment he was going to dial into his parenting. And so he leaned over and he said, I just want to clarify what I think I heard you sing. Oh, Christmas tree, I have no traditional German pants. I have no, and Lederhosen was the 4 words that I knew in German, and I strung these together rather creatively, I might add, to make a sentence. Now, luckily, my grandmother had started to lose her hearing at this point, so it gave my father the opportunity to say, let's sing something we all know. Let's sing Edelweiss. And even my brother couldn't resist that, because it reminded us of the time when we picked my grandmother up at the airport, the one and only time she had ever been back to Germany. And we picked her up, and between JFK Airport and her home, the entire way on the Belt Parkway, we sang the whole soundtrack to The Sound of Music. My brother also had sort of a creative way of using the words. I really liked the phrase that he came up with was, how do you solve a problem like my sister? I'm gonna spit on your head while I hold you down. I like that. And at some point in the ride, my grandmother reached into the sleeve in her coat and she ripped out the lining and she pulled out this little package that was soggy and had one tiny little spring growing out of it. And she put it in my hand and she said, Wohlblumen, Edelweiss. And we planted that in her garden. And my father, a few days later, said, how did you get that into the country? Did you smuggle that? Now remember, this is the time when you would get on the airplane and they would hand you knives. And pretty much, if you wanted to smoke, you could smoke in rows 1 through 10, but 11 was definitely a no smoking row. The only thing you couldn't do was you couldn't bring back any kind of plants or fruit or vegetables. And when my father asked my grandmother, she got this little defiant smirk on her face, and she said, yes, I did smuggle that across 3 countries. She cultivated this over her lifetime. And when we were done with the chores in the summertime, we would lay in that bed of Edelweiss. And she would tell me stories about coming from Germany, about walking in the Black Forest with her mother and cooking with her brothers, and the story of how she came to this country, and how in 1920, her mother died of tuberculosis, and her father remarried, and her stepmother didn't like her. And so she packed all of her belongings in a steamer trunk. She put her on a boat for Ellis Island. And she landed here not knowing a soul and not speaking a word of English. And she rebuilt her life in this country. When my grandmother died, my brother and I cleaned out her house. And we found that steamer trunk. And we dug through it. And in the bottom of it, we found a package that had never been opened. And the postmark said 1983, 10 years before she had died. And I recognized the return address as Mühlacker, Germany, which is the town that she came from. My brother and I were like, why did she never open this? She must have had some reason not to open it. We should really respect that. And we did for like 9 seconds. We ripped it open, and inside there was a letter in German, and with the width and breadth of my German language skills, I determined that everyone had their pants on. And then there was a package of pictures of people we didn't know. And on the back of one of the pictures, it said Adolf Kling. And it was a picture of my grandmother's youngest brother in a Nazi uniform. The air just got sucked out of the room, and my brother and I just sort of stood there looking at each other. How could she never have talked about this? She must have known. Is this the reason she never went back to Germany? Is this the reason she felt so disconnected from the place that she loved so much? I went outside and I sat in that foundation of Wohlblumen, and that's when I knew. If you want an example of a perfect bell curve, we don't have to look any farther than our own lives. Because on the high end, the things that we get from our families are incredible. And if we care for them and cultivate them, they blossom into a foundation that we can pass down for generations. And on the low end, there are dark, horrible, shameful secrets that are so hard to look at that we have to push them into the corners. But if we're lucky, most of our lives live solidly in the middle of that perfect curve, where we are just humming along, hoping nobody realizes we don't know the words.